thank you everyone so much for joining our Asian American community virtual town hall this evening. I am really glad that you're here. I hope everyone is staying home and staying safe and staying healthy. My name is Stephanie Chang. I'm the state senator for District 1 here in Michigan, which includes a large portion of Detroit and a number of downriver communities. And we're really excited to put this town hall on this evening because we know that in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, we have a lot of needs in the community and so much that we need to continue to work on to make sure people have what they need. And at the same time, we also know that there has been an increase in harassment and in hate towards Asian Americans due to a number of factors, but specifically, a fear and fear mongering from the White House and others related to the virus. And so we want to make sure that we're getting information out to the Asian American community about what your rights are, what is a hate crime, what is discrimination, who are the different law enforcement officials that you need to know, how do you report, what does the law say, and the reason why we want to share all of this information is because knowledge really is power. And so we hope that you will take notes this evening and also to really share the information that you learned tonight with your family and your neighbors and your friends to make sure that folks know what they can do and that they know what their rights are. I want to thank the Asian Pacific American Legislative Caucus for joining us. We are a small but mighty caucus of Asian American legislators as well as legislators who represent various districts with large Asian American populations. We know that Representative Julie Brixey is here with us. Thank you for being here. And I believe we might have staff from Senator Dana Polahanki's office. So thanks for joining us. I will ask that all of our speakers speak slowly. We do have live captioning. For those who want to see the captioning, just a reminder, you can click on the 3 dots and the more button if you're on Zoom to click show subtitles. And if you have questions throughout the Zoom, if you have questions throughout the event, you can put them in the Zoom chat or in the comments on Facebook Live. I'm going to turn it over now to Representative Padma Kupa.
Hi, I'm Padma Kupa. I'm the state representative for Troy and Clawson. It's nice to be here, although the topic is not one that we necessarily are happy about. It is definitely important to have opportunities like this to share with the community. As Senator Chang said, knowledge is power, and really knowing what your rights are, knowing how to cope with the current climate as racial discrimination against Asian Americans, particularly East Asian Americans, is on the rise and people are afraid. I serve the cities of Troy and Clawson, and I've heard from neighbors and friends across the region about the challenges that they're facing in just taking a walk. So I really would like to thank our partnering organizations, the Michigan Asian Pacific Affairs American Commission, the American Citizens for Justice, the Association of Chinese Americans, APIA Vote Michigan, the Chinese Association of Greater Detroit, the Chinese American Coalition to Fight COVID-19, North American Chinese Coalition, the Rising Voices of Asian American Families, and the American Citizens for Justice, especially remembering Vincent Chin and the violence that was done then. We do not want to repeat that. And so knowing how to cope is really, really important. So I'm going to turn it over to Toshiki to say a few words, the chair of the Asian Pacific American Commission.
Thank you, Senator Chang and Representative Gupta. My name is Toshiki Masaki. I'm the chair of Michigan Asia Pacific American Affairs Commission, or MAPAC. And those of you who are not familiar, that is a state commission consisting of 21 governor-appointed commissioners representing various Asian communities throughout Michigan. I am very happy to be representing the commission as a part of the hosting group, and I'm sure many of the current commissioners and past commissioners are joining in this webinar. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it back to Representative Gupta. Thank you.
So our first question, I think, is are we going directly into the presentation, or do we want to take a few questions first?
Let's go into the presentation.
Yeah, so I want to introduce our speaker, Sunita Dodamani. She is the Assistant Attorney General and the head of the Hate Crimes Criminal Division for the state of Michigan under our Attorney General, Dana Nessel. Really great to have you here, Sunita. I know that you come with a lot of experience, both teaching at UD Mercy and working at as a prosecuting attorney, assistant prosecuting attorney in Macomb and in Wayne. And really, we're happy to have you and your colleagues here to speak to the issues around hate crimes today.
Thanks so much, Representative Koopa. I can always count on you to say my name right. You're probably one of the only people in the world that can do that right off the bat. So thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. I want to introduce you to myself as well as the two people I've got with me, kind of our panelists today. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves right after I tell you a little bit about myself. So I am the head of the Hate Crimes Unit. Dana Nessel, the Attorney General, established this unit to investigate and prosecute hate crimes in this state and to provide support for local law enforcement for these particular kind of cases. I've been a prosecutor for over 15 years. I was at Wayne County Prosecutor's Office and Macomb County Prosecutor's Office, and I've handled hate crimes involving murder, involving robbery, involving vicious assaults. And I have with me today two people to share this presentation with. I'm going to turn it to Tony Lewis from Michigan Department of Civil Rights to just introduce himself.
Good evening. I'm Anthony Lewis. Everybody calls me Tony, so thank you.
Sorry, Tony.
No, but yes, I'm Anthony Lewis, and I am the Director of Business and Community Affairs for the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. I have been with the Department of Civil Rights for 19 years. And started out as an investigator, and pretty well versed in all of the work we're going to be sharing with you today.
Thank you, Anthony. I've got Agent Lupinacci also. Can you just say a minute, say hi?
Hi, yep, Special Agent Joe Lupinacci with the FBI office in Detroit. I was a lawyer for a little while, 8 years in Chicago, and Assistant Attorney General for the state of Illinois. And I joined the Bureau, and I'm a civil rights agent and civil rights coordinator for the office.
Thank you. So want to ask everybody if they can during the presentation to keep their mics on mute. And then we'll have a question and answer after we kind of go through a couple of things. I thought it was, first, thank you, Senator Chang and Representative Cooper, for putting this together and inviting us to talk. This is, no one wants to scare anyone about what's happening in the world, but you'd have to be living really under a rock to not know that there are crimes occurring against Asian Americans all throughout this country because of the COVID-19 crisis, and kind of knowledge is power. I couldn't have said that better than Senator Chang said it. So, you know, knowing what to do if you are the victim is extremely important. It's really important to know kind of what to do. So first I want to just kind of start out by talking about what exactly a hate crime is. And it's important to define what a hate crime is. And it's important to think of a hate crime as a category of crimes. It's really any crime where a victim is targeted because of one of these biases, because of bias against their race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, disability, and that they And so you have to ask really first whether a crime has been committed, and then you have to identify whether it was done because of one of these categories. And people often ask, what if the person committing the crime is wrong about what the person is, about the category that they fit into? For instance, in many cases that we're hearing about now, if a Korean person or a Filipino person is assaulted because someone thought they were Chinese and assaulted them because they believe that the coronavirus is started by the Chinese. And so if they're wrong about what a person is, that still qualifies as a hate crime. Also, another question is, what if race or ethnicity is only one of the reasons that a victim is targeted? So an example of this would be if a person robs an undocumented immigrant, right? Because they know that that person is not going to report that crime to police. The main reason to rob them, obviously, is to get their money, to get their cell phone. But a reason that they pick them is because they believe they can get away with it. So this also qualifies as a hate crime. This slide kind of illustrates that hate crimes is really a category, and any crime that falls under this umbrella is one where bias comes into play. So things like ethnic intimidation, where it's an assault or a damage to property or a threat to do either one. But there are many different kinds of crimes in Michigan that can fall under this same umbrella. So other instances like bias motivated stalking, bomb threats that are bias motivated, cyberbullying. These are all different kinds of hate crimes. So what's the difference between a hate crime and any other crime? You often hear, well, isn't an assault no matter, whether it's done because of bias? And the answer to that kind of short way to put it is really no, because hate crimes are crimes that are trying to send a message to more than just one person. They're sending a message to an entire community. They can be more violent because they are crimes of passion. And really, they have a bigger impact on more than just one person. The whole community feels it. And this is a perfect example of what's happening right now. The entire Asian American community is seeing attacks against Asian Americans in other places. And even though they're not a part of that attack or experiencing that attack, they have a fear. There's a heightened anxiety in the whole community about going out in public, about wearing masks in public. It's because it's a messaging crime. It's a crime about attacking what a person is. So if you look at this picture here on the left of the car and the damage to the car, in this particular example, it's like you come outside. Imagine if this car was parked overnight at your house and you come outside and you see this sort of graffiti on it, and you're thinking about things like, this is some kid, oh, this is such a headache, this is something I'm gonna have to deal with, this is terrible. But if you come out in your driveway and overnight someone has carved these sorts of symbols into your car and you're from a certain community, this is going to be a much bigger deal, right? It's going to be a message to you, and you're going to have different fears. You're going to have different worries. Am I safe in my own home? Is my family safe in my home? What am I going to do? Do I have to move? Is this going to escalate? Is this my neighbors? It has a different message. And if you can understand the difference between the picture on the left and the picture on the right, then you understand the difference that a hate crime has on a community. So I want to give you some background data on hate crimes that happen in Michigan. And in Michigan, law enforcement agencies by law have to keep track of hate crimes. In Michigan State Police, they put together a report once a year, and they issue that report online, and it's made available to the public, and it tells you about all the incidents of hate crimes in Michigan. The FBI also has to do this for hate crimes in the entire country. So they have to keep track nationwide. And here's some of the statistics that, I'm sorry. Issue. So this is the number of incidents nationwide in the last 3 years. This is the source of this is the FBI report, where it's shown a 22% increase in the last 3 years. And you'll see in Michigan alone in the last 3 years, you'll see about a 34% increase. The FBI keeps track of Michigan, and state police also keeps track of Michigan. So you'll see about a 34 to 40% increase. when you look at what motivates, like what categories do these fall under in the last 3 years, you're looking at about 3/4 of them in Michigan. It's the graph on the right. 3/4 of them have to do with race and ethnicity, and then followed by hate crimes against people for religion, and then for sexual orientation. It kind of tracks nationally. So in the last reported cycle of 2018, Michigan State Police recorded only 5 incidents statewide that were anti-Asian specifically. This breaks it down by category. So these, you'll see about 3/4 of the crimes are crimes against individuals. That's very personal. It's a personal crime, not just against property, like crimes against society. This is breaking it down by offense type. And you'll see here in Michigan on the right again, intimidation and stalking and assaultive offenses are pretty high, as well as damage to property. And then the other category is all the other types of crimes that this falls into. So you'll see this is very much an individual sort of crime, but one that affects the entire community. This here will show you kind of hate crimes in Michigan broken down by county. And so the ones that are circled in blue are 5 or more incidents that were recorded in the last year. And the ones in red are about 10 or more incidents. Now, these numbers seem low, but I'll tell you why in a minute. I'm going to tell you to disregard all the statistics that I just showed you. And the reason I say that is because we know that only about 3% of hate crimes get reported to law enforcement. And that's a crazy number, right? 3%. And so how do we know exactly what, how do we know that it's only 3% if it's not getting reported? Because the FBI does a crime victim survey annually that shows that there's roughly about 250,000 incidents a year. But their official reporting shows that there are just a little over 7,000 incidents. So 7,000 is really 3% of what is being shown according to the crime victim survey. So why is that happening? It seems sort of, it seems kind of crazy to have all of these crimes happening that people are not reporting, but there's a lot of barriers to reporting. And there's several, but there's oftentimes mistrust between law enforcement and maybe that particular community. That for instance, like undocumented people, there's a fear of deportations. They're not going to experience a crime and then go and report it to law enforcement, right? The transgender community and the LGBTQ community has historically strained interactions, with law enforcement, so they might not be reporting crime. There is fear of law enforcement in certain communities. Oftentimes people tell us that they don't report the incidents because they're not taken seriously when they do. And you'll hear things from police officers like, oh, this is just kids, or, this is not happening in my community. My community is not one. Nobody wants to be known as a racist community, right? It's not a problem in my community. You'll hear things like they didn't want to make it a big deal, or that the media is blowing it out of proportion. Who's going to report if they think? And it's not like the majority of hate crimes that are happening are these huge incidents like, the Tree of Life synagogue, or, mass shooting that's occurring. The majority of incidents are things that don't rise to that level, but are just as impactful to communities, right? So oftentimes there's also language barriers that prevent people from reporting, or cultural barriers. Maybe in a country where they came from, the police are known as corrupt. And so there is not a knee-jerk reaction to go report. So there's a lot of barriers to reporting that prevent accurate information. And so that results in inaccurate data collection on actual hate crimes. The difference between hate crime and hate speech or hate incident. This is what we are hearing a lot of about in Michigan right now with, strangers yelling at Asian Americans on the street, sort of doing that. So then the question becomes, when does something rise to the level of a crime? And, is speech, is somebody randomly yelling on the street, does that rise to the level of a crime? So hate-filled speech itself is not a crime. It's protected by the First Amendment's right to free speech. So people unfortunately can say whatever they want to anyone, as long as it's not speech that's coupled with action that brings it to the level of a crime. So some speech does rise to the level of a crime. And giving you some examples here. Words with actions that do rise to the level of a crime, things like stalking, cyberbullying, bomb threats, lying to the police, ethnic intimidation, false report of a felony, making a terroristic threat. So if you think of this as, if these are bias motivated, then this is speech that does rise to the level of a crime. So I've got a couple examples here just to run by you to kind of give you an example of this. So things like hanging anti-Semitic flyers in public places. We know that that has happened a lot in Michigan. And in fact, Carolyn Normandin from the Anti-Defamation League is here too, and maybe she could talk during the question and answer period, but this is occurring in a lot of places. Is this a crime? No, because this is First Amendment protected speech. Swastika graffiti on a Jewish deli. This is a crime because this involves property damage. Racist social media posts threatening to shoot up a school. Yes, this would be a hate crime because this is not just speech, this is action where you're threatening to shoot up a school. A post on, let's see, sorry, I gotta move this. A posting hateful racist comments on Facebook. No, that doesn't rise to the level of a crime. You see a lot of that happening right now. But unfortunately, that is not a crime because people have the right to say what they want on Facebook. Robbing an undocumented immigrant person because they know that person won't report to police. Yes, and I think I talked about that earlier as an example. A man who attacks a Chinese woman because he thinks Chinese people are responsible for COVID-19. Yes, this is definitely a hate crime. Grabbing a Muslim woman's covering off her head because it's not American to wear a head covering. Yes, this is also, it's physical contact. This would be ethnic intimidation. Beating up a person because they're gay. Yes, and this would also be physical assault, right? So these are just some examples. What are we seeing here in Michigan about related to COVID? What kind of COVID fueled hate crimes are we seeing, if any? So we're seeing a lot of national incidents. We've heard about a family getting stabbed at a Sam's Club down in Texas. There have been people on the subway who have been attacked. There's been a lot of national incidents in the paper. And so we're getting more exposure to those sorts of incidents, and we're hearing about those things. And they're having their intended effect, right? They're messaging crimes. It's putting people in fear. But right now in Michigan, we're not seeing that much violence in Michigan right now. There's been, and Roland, who's on the call today, made us aware of an incident involving someone getting spit on at a grocery store, an incident of someone getting their mask grabbed off of their face. So we are aware of these incidents. There is some harassment of Asian Americans. There was one racist graffiti on a sign at Stony Metro Creek Park, and that was COVID related. And what we're mostly seeing is Zoom bombing of religious gatherings. And so this is when someone is hosting a Zoom meeting of one of their religious ceremonies or gatherings, and they're doing it over Zoom and they're making it public. And as a result of making it public, they're getting Zoom bombed. Either people are showing their genitals or they're displaying child pornography. It's really been terrible. And ADL, and Carolyn can talk about this later, but ADL has a really great resource for people to make sure they're putting the right security settings in when they're doing Zoom meetings. And of course, we've seen reports around the country, and most of those reports have been seen in New York and California, and there's been some abroad as well in England. So what can you do if you are the victim of a hate crime? So I'm going to turn it over to Special Agent Lupinacci, who can kind of go over this slide, if he could.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. So just a little bit of a background as to what the FBI does and how it differs a little bit from the state. We enforce the federal statutes, and they're a little bit different. And the Assistant Attorney General who was talking explained how Michigan has the Michigan statutes to support prosecuting a claim if there's an indication of bias. The main difference is that it's a sole bias statute. So what that means is the bias against a particular race, religion, ethnicity, or a sexual orientation, it needs to be the entire bias that motivates that person to commit that crime. So it has to be they committed the crime because of that bias and only because of that bias. And so what happens is if you feel like you're the victim of a hate crime or you know somebody that has been, you can work with community leaders or religious leaders, and you can, or call your local law enforcement, and that message could get reported to the FBI by a number of different ways. You can call your local FBI office. We're headquartered in Detroit, but we have 11 other satellite offices throughout the state of Michigan. And you can call that number that's going to be on a slide. It's 313-965-2323. We can mention it again later. And you can make that complaint to them. And that's going to go to a national fusion center. It's sort of like calling 911, but because FBI is not going to be able to, in that capacity, be your first responder, they're not the number that you're going to call in a case of an emergency. That is 911. But to report that crime, you can call the FBI office, and that will go to our National Threat Operations Center. And that was set up after the Parkland shooting, and that was something that the FBI recognized was a weakness within its organization and created a National Threat Operations Center to disseminate all those complaints down to the local offices so that the complainant, you, the caller, won't have to be responsible for figuring out how to route your message, but it's going to go through and it's going to go to the appropriate agent. And that will alert me or whatever other agent is handling the civil rights crimes in that area. And we'll work with our local prosecutors. We'll work with the AG's office. We'll work with our county prosecutors, and we'll work with our federal prosecutors and determine whether or not it fits any of the federal hate crime statutes. If it doesn't fit a federal hate crime statute, we can work to make sure it's covered under the one of the Michigan statutes that can cover it. And I'll let the attorneys on board talk about that with you. And so the main goal is to make sure that no matter what, a hate crime is prosecuted, whether it's on the federal level or the state level, because our hands are always tied by what Congress and what the legislature has given to us as what the laws are. Our job is just to enforce them. And so once that happens, if it's a prosecutable offense, then the law enforcement can move forward and investigate accordingly. If it's not a prosecutable offense, if it doesn't rise to hate crime and it's just a hate speech, even though it's disgusting, it doesn't rise to a criminal level, there's still some things we can do. And what we have had success with in the past is going out and actually interviewing and talking to that individual, that hate actor, and talking to them about what they did was wrong and educating them on what hate crimes are and educating them on how their speech is hateful and that it flirts very closely with criminal activity. And that oftentimes stops that type of hate speech from getting any worse, from happening again in the community. And the main goal is we want that hateful speech to stop, no matter what capacity it is, because the FBI takes civil rights crimes and hate crimes very seriously. It's one of our top priorities in our office, especially in the state of Michigan. Our message is always that hate against your community is hate against our community. We take it personally because we live in the same communities as everybody else. And oftentimes we are also, folks in our office are affected the same way any other member of the public would be. These are heinous crimes, and we treat them as such, and we're staffed accordingly. I'm on a squad that handles civil rights cases, and we deal with this stuff on a daily basis. And it's never a burden to call the FBI office and report. Even if you're not sure if it's a hate crime, just call your local law enforcement or your FBI office, and we're happy to talk to you about it.
Agent Lupinacci, were you going to go over this slide?
Sure, absolutely. So if you are a victim of a hate crime, that's something that Carolyn Norman is the ADL regional director. She's on the line. We mentioned her earlier. This is a quote that she always gives, and we love to repeat it. It's report, report, report. Like I said before, even if you don't know if it's a hate crime, that's not for you to decide. We can certainly handle that and decide whether or not that's going to be prosecutable, and we'll treat it as seriously as we're supposed to. And so don't hesitate, because it's important that your local law enforcement and your prosecutors are aware of the hateful speech and hateful conduct in your community. and it's the same way, if you could advance all of them, that'd be great. So it's the same way if you suspect any sort of criminal conduct that happens, whether it be any type of evidence that could be there, don't wash it away. Take pictures of it right away. Write down exactly what was said. It's very important to understand whether or not that message is criminal, because there's so much that's protected under the First Amendment. It's always, the FBI or any law enforcement can't predicate an investigation based on someone's First Amendment right, free speech. So it's always a delicate balance between liberty and security. So exactly what was said is essential to figure out whether or not that it would be prosecutable, or if any type of action should be taken from law enforcement. You can write down and take as many notes as you need. You can upload a translator, and I think it's important that you notify law enforcement and members of your community who can notify their respective law enforcement contacts. If there are holy days or special holidays coming up, if you feel like there's an incident or an event in your community that could draw some sort of attention from hate actors, feel free to let somebody know. We're always available, and again, we'll give our number at the end of this presentation, and you can call anytime and it can be routed to me. I'm happy to talk to you about it and make sure that everybody is aware who needs to be aware. Yeah, like I had said before, the most important thing is if you feel like there's an immediate danger and you feel threatened, your physical violence or force, call 911. Your first responders are going to be the safest and fastest reaction. Our FBI office is just it's not equipped to be that way. And so call 911, and then your second call can be to your community leader, or your second call can be to the FBI office to let them know. We talk about the different types of threats. It's, physical, verbal, electronic, or written or visual threat. That we see a lot of electronic threats now during the coronavirus, because a lot of people are home, and a lot of people aren't working, and they have access to the internet, and they're just stewing in their hate, and they love to express it. And so we're always protecting ourselves with the appropriate Zoom settings to make sure that people can't hop on and try to Zoom bomb any conversation, and take those safeguards, even though it's frustrating because it limits a lot of our ability to communicate and express and assemble its unfortunate consequence. But it's the world we live in, and that's the safeguards that we have to have in place. And it's frustrating, but it helps to limit those hateful messages and their ability to spread it so quickly. If it's a physical threat, I'm sure a lot of folks have heard the run, hide, fight message. If do not engage if you can help it. And if there's a verbal threat, if there's any type of threat, you can always call the police. I'm sure your local law enforcement, your community, and I would be happy to talk to you about any threat that you receive whatsoever. So do not hesitate to give anybody a call and let them know. And like we said before, take down as many notes as you possibly can, and save any envelopes. Don't open them. Don't wash away any graffiti. Take pictures of it, and do your normal, logical steps to preserving the types of evidence that you think prosecutors might need to press charges against this actor. And so there are there's a wide variety of statutes that are at law enforcement's disposal. And so it's important that you preserve anything possible, because even a conspiracy to commit a civil rights crime can be a federal crime. So like an electronic threat, you can print it, you can take a picture of it, you can screenshot it, and you can contact your local law enforcement. You can email it right over to me. I'd love to take a look at it and pass it on to the other prosecutors. The main thing is don't delete it, don't tamper with it, and don't change it. And for written or visual threats, obviously there could be fingerprints on it. That's something that we see all the time on TV, so don't touch it. Handle it as little as possible, and contact your local law enforcement, and they're going to tell you exactly how you should handle that particular object, whether it's a brick, whether it's a car, whether it's a piece of paper. It's going to be different on what you should do. So just don't touch it, and wait for someone who's a law enforcement professional to help you preserve that evidence. And you can note the exact date, time, location, and any witnesses. Take good notes. This will be helpful later on.
Okay, sorry. So I did mention the Michigan Ethnic Intimidation Act before, and I just want to go over that just real quickly and briefly. And I also want to give a lot of time for questions, so I'm going to kind of race through this. But essentially, Michigan Ethnic Intimidation Act is when someone causes physical contact or damage to property or communicates a believable threat to do either of those things because of that person's race, color, religion, gender, or national origin. This is exactly what the statute says. It makes a crime like this into a two-year offense, which basically what it does is it takes something that would normally be a misdemeanor and it raises it to the level of a felony because of the reason the person is targeted, because of race or religion, gender, national origin. It also, in some cases, allows for a civil suit to be brought to collect 3 times the amount of damages that have incurred. And this is where Tony is going to talk about, and I noticed in the chat section, there was a question about, well, what if it doesn't rise to the level of a crime? What can state governments do about people who have experienced discrimination, and what can we do about that? And what can I tell people about that? So Tony's going to talk. I'm sorry, Anthony. I keep calling you Tony. I'm sorry. Anthony is going to talk about that.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. One of the things I wanted to stress is that at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, we're responsible, our jurisdiction covers the Michigan 2 Civil Rights Laws, which is the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, and the Michigan Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Act. And they are 2 of the most comprehensive civil rights laws in the state civil rights laws in the country, actually. And one of the things I wanted to stress is report. If you're not sure, because there are times when what we've talked about now with the Michigan Ethnic Intimidation Act, one of the things is there has to be an underlying crime, and then it has to be have a bias motivated crime. Well, there are times when it may not rise to the level of a crime, and that's when, but it could be a violation of the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. And in those situations, we talked about hate speech, and one of the things in terms of hate speech is that at times, yes, it is protected by the First Amendment, but if you're talking about it in an employment context, it could very well rise to the level of having a hostile work environment, which is a violation of the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. It's also important to understand that you don't necessarily have to be in a what's called, if someone perceives that you are a member in a particular group and you're being treated in that way, or you're being addressed in that fashion, that still could very well be a violation in terms of the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. A couple of things I wanted to make sure that I cover really quickly, because I want to get to that. I want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible. But in terms of the physical, verbal, electronic, and written, those were, one of the things that were context is when there's a threat. Well, from the context in a civil rights context, there does not necessarily have to be a threat. It could be racially derogatory. It could be ethnically derogatory language, especially if it's in a housing setting, if it's in an employment setting or educational setting. And then there's either actions follow behind it, or it's continuous and it creates a hostile environment. So the one thing I would want to leave you with is report it. Our information is there. All of our agencies' information will be on the final slide. But report it, because one of the things is that we work closely together. We have a very close working relationship. We're all partners. So it's very possible if there's a threat, call 911, period. And, but if you believe that you're not in imminent danger, but you're not sure, then I would say call our office, call Sunita's office, call our office, and we will work with you or refer you to wherever, to whatever agency or to whatever that you would need in that situation. And also stressing, one last thing in terms of stressing reporting is also community leaders. We also have a network where we work with all of our community leaders. So if you're not comfortable with coming directly to law enforcement, then yes, by all means, please report it to your community leaders, because they're your allies. And they're your allies, and they can provide, and they can be your supports. They can work with you by being your support system, and coming to us also on your behalf and working with you on your behalf and working with us on your behalf. So I just want to ensure that report. want to make sure we put that forward. So I'm going to leave it now, and let's get in, allow us to kind of get to the questions. Make sure we get enough questions here.
Thank you so much. So we are going to rotate between me and Representative Koopa to ask the questions. And I will note that since we're getting close to 7 o'clock, we still got quite a bit of time for questions, but if we don't get your question, what you could do is leave your email address in the chat box, and then we will get back to you. A couple questions about hotline numbers. Is there a list of hate crime hotline numbers across various states? And also, is there different languages capability on both the MDCR hotline and the AG's hate crimes unit hotline?
I would say that there's this shot right here, the screen share that we have right now. We have the FBI, the Michigan Attorney General Hate Crimes Unit, and the Department of Civil Rights numbers. Are there additional ones?
No, there are no additional numbers for this. This is how you would reach us. Those email addresses, that phone number, that's monitored every single day. And so if you let us know, and again, an immediate threat, you should call your local police, you should call 911. Now, across states, there are some attorney general's offices that have units like this, but there's also the U.S. Attorney's Office that also is another point of contact. So most of these have online resources or email addresses, things like that. As far as translation services, we don't have a translation service at the Attorney General's office, but we do have access to something called Language Line, which I'm not sure, Anthony, can you tell us whether MDCR has that same access? It can translate hundreds of languages. This is something local law enforcement can do too. If you're ever on a traffic stop and you're stopped by local law enforcement, they have access to Language Line. If you don't feel comfortable speaking in English and you want to speak in your native language, they can get an interpreter on Language Line within minutes. Anthony?
Yes, I was going to say we can work with you. We can definitely work with you on getting the necessary translation services so that we can ensure that we provide you with the services.
So I believe, Sunita, that you said that there are no reported incidents here in the state of Michigan. At least in the Tri-County area. One of the challenges I see, and I don't know, maybe all of you can address this, while there are incidents, people don't always want to report. Do you have any answers or suggestions? Because I know there was a local house of worship of an Asian American community that had some bad language written on it, and they reported it to the police, but they didn't want to do anything else about it. And so what do we do when people are hesitant for fear of retribution from taking it any further?
Right, that's a great question. That's a really great question, because I think people are hesitant to contact law enforcement for like a number of reasons. And I had that whole slide about barriers to reporting, right? But I think one of the reasons that it is important to at least to report it, if not having to go through an entire prosecution or, we would never take a case where we would force someone to follow through if they didn't want to. That is not something we would ever do. So reporting it is important. And maybe Carolyn Normandin is on the line from ADL. One of the reasons I always say to report it is, even if it is not a crime right now, if that person does something in the future, chances are that it's an escalation of a previous incident. So you're letting law enforcement know that something could be happening down the road, because people who commit hate crimes, it's not their first time that they've ever done something racist or anti-Islamophobic or whatever it is. These things, they start off small and then they escalate from there. Carolyn, do you have something to add about why it's important to report, even if you don't want to go ahead and prosecute an incident?
Yes, thank you very, very much. I care very deeply about this topic. It's something I deal with every single day. The Anti-Defamation League is a civil rights organization, and it's been in existence for more than 100 years. We've been tracking hateful incidents for more than 100 years. So ADL is one of a very few numbers of organizations who actually care about incidents because we don't track crimes as much. We leave that up to law enforcement. So in the case of, for example, the person who talked about incidents online and things like that, ADL is tracking these. We are reporting them, especially the Zoom bombing. And the ADL historically was started as a Jewish organization, but we have a dual mission to fight anti-Semitism and to secure equal justice for all. So I've been working with a local mosque because they were Zoom bombed. So I sent the senator some links to the ADL website on how to prevent Zoom bombing, what exactly Zoom bombing is. And for those of you who don't know, Zoom bombing is using digital platforms using interruptions to digital platforms like this to actually make not only offensive kinds of threats, but also some very, very specific threats against different religions. And this is happening all across the country, also in Michigan. I also wanted to bring up that there's a lot of hateful incidents that are occurring online, particularly since the COVID-19 crisis occurred, and particularly talking about Asian Americans. And that is calling for people to spit on Asian Americans and cough on them and cough on immigrants. And so these are real big issues, and ADL is collecting them all. So I sent some links over to the senator, but go to adl.org, adl.org, like Apple, Larry, David.org. And you can find out how to report an incident. You can find out, you put something in the search bar and you'll get a lot of hits on what you can do. You'll see some of the webinars that we've given. There's a whole cottage industry right now about targeting Asian Americans with ugly memes, with ugly language, and it's living very well on the internet right now. So I would want to say to anybody, I agree with Joe and Anthony and Sita, report. And if it's a crime, for sure, law enforcement. And if it's not, then come to the ADL or the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. We talk all the time. And we really want to make sure that people understand it's okay to stand up to this kind of hateful rhetoric. And we're doing it in newspapers across and on digital platforms all across the country every day.
Thank you so much. And I did post those links in the chat box for everyone to see, so hopefully you can see them there. We had a question. What can we do on both a personal and institutional level to address racially motivated harassment that doesn't rise to a level of a hate crime? What can state governments do? This participant administers a Facebook group of Asian American and Pacific Islander Air Force officers, and they have members in their families who have experienced various levels of harassment. And so looking for ways to educate and empower their members. I will say, I mean, just a couple thoughts for myself. I think what's really important at a personal level is for us all to be spreading information to our neighbors and your members and just folks that we know in the community about what we learned from today's presentation. Because I think, again, you know, sharing this type of information can be powerful so that people know that there are resources out there. And I will open it up for other responses from our presenters.
Yes, if you don't mind, I'd like to take that one. What I would say to that question is contact one if it does, you know, if you don't believe that it rises to the level of a crime, and you're not in immediate danger, then I would contact our office, the Department of Civil Rights, because there are often times where it may be discriminatory harassment. It does not have to necessarily rise to a level of a crime where there's been a crime committed. So, and then we could work with you on educating your particular organizations and all, because I think that education is the key. If you know what resources are out there, then you're more likely to access those resources. So I would think that's one thing, is to educate your community on all the resources that are out there. But in that specific situation, I would say contact our office. We can work with you on, like I said, I'll work with you on also on different presentations on what the law states, on what your options are, on what all the different options and everything that's out there available to you. But one thing I would say is contact our office, and please do have, so that we can work with you. And as you see here, we have many partnerships. So we would like to, so you'll be able to receive a wide range, like today, of information of all things, all resources that are.
I have a question, and I think this is a real important one for our viewers, attendees to know. Are local police departments educated about hate crimes, and what do they do? And I'll say that here in Troy, we actually have an alliance, the Troy Area Alliance Against Hate Crimes, that is in partnership with our police department. But I know that not all communities are as fortunate. But if you have any other information, I think a lot of it is also community outreach so that we connect with our police here in Troy. But what can other communities do, and what do other communities do?
That's a great question. I think around in Southeast Michigan, we have a bunch of like super woke, some very super woke jurisdictions, right? Where police chiefs are very into hate crimes and wanting to make sure that communities are safe and recognizing like really rich diversity that we have in Southeast Michigan. But some police departments, some law enforcement, they aren't so great about it. And so what they can do is they can be proactive, and they can be, they can reach out to our office. We do trainings for police officers. We train at police academies. We train officers on how to identify and recognize hate crimes. One of the major issues about prosecuting hate crimes, and I think if you picked up nothing else from this presentation, it's that hate crimes are severely underreported, right? 3% of hate crimes get reported to law enforcement. So there's 3 real levels where the system fails. It's 1, people don't report. 2, the police, even if they're reporting, don't necessarily identify it as a hate crime. And then 3rd, when it gets to the level of actually prosecuting, it's also not being identified properly. But that's what we exist for. We offer our resources to local law enforcement, to prosecutors' offices, to come in, give them training on how to handle these cases, how best to do it, what kind of special instructions can be crafted, what the law is in the state, how to deal with marginalized communities, how to have effective strategies for that. So if you're a member of a police department, or if you are close to a member of a police department and they want to reach out, we can provide those kind of resources.
Representative, I'd also like to mention that Anthony and I belong, and Joe belong, and Sita, we all belong to an organization called ALPACT, and this is a community and policing organization. We meet often, we talk about these things often. From my perspective, when I'm calling member of law enforcement because an incident of hate has been reported to my office, I don't know if they just are afraid of the ADL or what, but I have had nothing but strong support from members of law enforcement. I think what the AG, the assistant AG was saying is true. This changes slowly, and it's really helped by community forums like this. It's okay to stand up to hate. I would say never get yourself in a situation where you're going to be threatened, but there's safety in numbers. And when more and more people discuss this in a rational and thoughtful way and find levels of interaction and cooperation, we're much more able to eradicate hateful activity in our communities when we work together. So I would say it's really important for A, to report things, and B, not give up, and make sure that people understand what you're going through, because there's a lot of resources here. You can tell by the number of people that are calling it, that are writing questions, and the number of people on this panel.
Thanks so much. I know we're running out of time here, so I want to get a couple more questions in. One, people have asked if we're going to share the presentation. We're going to try to figure out a way to do that. If you pre-registered, we're hoping we can find everyone's emails through Zoom to be able to send the slides out. So stay tuned for that. We had a couple of questions related to what to do, you know, in a couple different instances. So what to do if you are verbally harassed and you've got kids around, how do you respond, and also model for children that are nearby how to respond. And then we had an example that someone shared about someone who, sorry, that's my baby in the background, someone who was walking on the roadside, or someone who was driving and the person walking next to them gave them a middle finger, it sounds like. And so there's not really a way to know like who that person was or how to report specifically. So I'm wondering if you can respond to those two specific examples of how to respond in the moment with children nearby, and then the other example. Oh, good news is we did get everyone's email, so we will send around the slides as long as the presenters are okay with it.
I also want to add just a couple of things. One is my email is in the chat box. If you have a question that wasn't answered or you have further questions on these issues, please reach out to our offices. Mine is padmakupa@house.mi.gov. Senator Chang is senchang@senate.michigan.gov. The Senate likes to spell out Michigan, so senchang@senate.michigan.gov. And I also want to just say very uniquely that Senator Chang and I met, I think about 14 years ago, through an organization that actually hosts ALPACT. It's very dear to my heart, Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion. They were doing work on these issues of equity and opportunity for all. And so really good to hear that all of you are connected through ALPACT. I am glad that Michigan Roundtable has sort of convened that group and hosted that group, and Des Squire is definitely deserves a shout out. So thank you, Carolyn, for recognizing ALPACT. Senator Chang, any closing comments? We're almost at the top of the hour.
Well, I wanted to make sure that we had a chance for our presenters to respond to the question I asked, and then I'll give some closing, very, very brief remarks. To our presenters, did you have anything you wanted to say in response to the questions from that I just asked?
Agent Lupinacci, do you have anything you wanted to advise them on? I think this kind of goes back to those slides you talked about when you know you're faced with a threat in the moment.
Sure, and we're talking about a verbal threat, so it's going to be. I think that was the question. So it's not less than a physical threat, but there isn't an imminent apprehension of violence or physical force or injury. I mean, so the important thing is obviously, I think was with children present, you're setting a good example of what it means to living in America, which can be a double-edged sword. It can be very challenging at times that even people who spread hateful messages have protections and rights under the First Amendment too. And that might not be rise to level being criminal, but taking down the important information that they say, don't respond with threats in return, don't respond with hateful messages in return. That's only going to beget more hate. And if truly are towards the goal of reducing hateful messages, you know, setting that good example for not only the children around, but also that perpetrator, I think is important in just speaking in humanity. And taking down notes of exactly what the message is and the witnesses that could potentially corroborate that incident and reporting that to your local law enforcement. I think that would be the appropriate response in any of those types of situations.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to close out here. I just want to say thank you to all of our amazing presenters. Thank you to Representative Kupa, and also thank you to all of our partner organizations for being a part of this event. And everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you soon.
怎么又晚了？
这诊所太远了，这里多开几间就好了。
政府里需要有我们的人，需求才会被听到。
哎，你这……哎，你们两个都对，可光说有什么用呢？填好2020年的人口普查，就可以协助公共资金的分配，比如地方医疗、更多的政府席位。想要给自己发声啊，赶紧上网填，打电话也行。
请上2020census.gov 完成普查。